At 1:40 in the morning, a second Iranian F-4 climbed toward a light that had already blinded one fighter's instruments. Its crew acquired a radar return at 27 nautical miles. Then, something smaller separated from the light and came straight at them. The pilot prepared an AIM-9 missile. His weapons panel died. That sequence appears in a U.S. military message about the night of September 19, 1976. The document does not prove that an alien craft entered Iranian airspace. It proves something more limited and, in its own way, more disturbing. Civilians, an Air Force command post, 2 fighter crews, radar, and a commercial aircraft became part of the same unresolved chain of reports. Somewhere inside that chain, machines failed at precisely the moments when the men flying them needed certainty. To understand why Iran responded with armed interceptors, forget the modern image of an isolated country flying obsolete aircraft. In 1976, the Shah's Iran was a major American ally positioned against the Soviet Union. Its Air Force operated sophisticated U.S.-built equipment, and the F-4 Phantom II was not a ceremonial jet. It was a fast, 2-seat interceptor designed to find targets at night, acquire them on radar, and destroy them. The mystery began on the ground. At about 12:30 a.m., according to the military report, the Iranian Air Force command post received 4 telephone calls from residents of Shamiran, a district in northern Tehran. Their descriptions were inconsistent. Some spoke of a bird-like object. Others thought they were seeing a helicopter with a light. No helicopters were known to be airborne at the time. A senior officer initially suggested that the callers were looking at stars. Then he went outside. What he saw was described only as an object north of the city, similar to a star but larger and brighter. That distinction matters. The original message does not describe a gigantic metal craft hanging over Tehran. It records a brilliant light whose identity could not be established from the ground. After consulting Mehrabad Tower, the officer ordered an F-4 to launch from Cherokee Air Base and investigate. At 1:30 a.m., the first Phantom took off. The names of the first crew do not appear in the surviving U.S. message, and later accounts disagree about the pilot's identity. What the contemporary report preserves is the crew's experience. The F-4 headed toward a point roughly 40 nautical miles north of Tehran. The light was so bright, the report says, that it could be seen from 70 miles away. At a range of 25 nautical miles, the fighter lost all instrumentation. Its UHF radio and internal communication system also failed. The crew broke off the intercept and turned back toward Cherokee. Once the aircraft was moving away, and, in the report's unusually suggestive wording, was apparently no longer a threat, its instruments and communications returned. That was the first warning. It was not yet evidence of a weapon. Aircraft suffer electrical faults, radios fail. Night observations distort distance and scale. A bright astronomical object can look strange through haze, fatigue, and a moving canopy. But an interceptor had been sent to identify a light, and the mission had ended with a systems failure near it. The command post did not close the file. 10 minutes after the first launch, it sent another Phantom into the darkness. The second aircraft was flown by Major Parviz Jafari, a squadron commander who later spoke publicly about the incident after retiring as a general. In the rear cockpit sat the weapons systems officer. Their jobs were divided. The pilot flew and fought the aircraft. The backseater operated the radar and helped manage the intercept. This time, the unknown was not only visual. The backseater acquired a radar lock at 27 nautical miles, high at the aircraft's 12 o'clock position. The reported closure rate was 150 knots. As the range fell to 25 miles, the target moved away and maintained that separation while remaining on the scope. The radar return was compared not to a Boeing 707, as the story is often retold, but to a KC-135 tanker. Yet brightness prevented the crew from judging the object's actual size. What they could describe were lights: blue, green, red, and orange. flashing so rapidly that all 4 colors seemed visible at once. A later U.S. Air Force newsletter rendered them as a rectangular pattern. The contemporary message is evidence that this description was reported, not independent proof that a physical rectangle occupied the sky. The Phantom continued south of Tehran. Then, the geometry changed. A second bright object appeared to detach from the primary one. The crew estimated its apparent size at 1/2 to 1/3 of the Moon. It came toward the F-4 at high speed. In an air defense cockpit, an unidentified object closing head-on is not a philosophical question. It is a possible weapon, and the time available to classify it can collapse to seconds. Jafari attempted to fire an AIM-9 missile. At that moment, the weapons control panel lost power. UHF and internal communications failed with it. The surviving report does not say that every electrical system in the jet went black. It does not say the engine stopped, the flight controls froze, or the cockpit became completely powerless. Those additions make the story more cinematic, but they are not in the record. What failed was specific enough to be terrifying: the systems required to coordinate and attack. Jafari could still fly. He turned and entered a -G dive to escape. The smaller light fell behind him at an estimated distance of 3 to 4 nautical miles. As the F-4 continued its turn away from the primary object, the secondary light moved inside the turn, departed, and returned to the larger light in what the report called a perfect rejoin. The danger had passed without impact, explosion, or visible projectile debris. Communications and the weapons panel returned. The sequence tempts an immediate conclusion. The object detected the hostile act and switched off the aircraft's ability to fire. That is one interpretation. The document itself records timing and crew perception. It does not establish the mechanism behind either. Then, another light emerged. This one did not attack the Phantom. It moved toward the ground at what the crew reported as a great rate of speed. Jafari watched for an explosion. None came. Instead, the object seemed to slow and rest gently on the Earth, casting a bright light across an area the message estimated at 2 to 3 kilometers. The crew descended from approximately 25,000 feet to 15,000 feet and tried to mark the location. On their approach to Mehrabad, they encountered heavy UHF interference. Each time they passed through a magnetic bearing of 150 degrees from the airport, they reported losing communications, while the inertial navigation system fluctuated by 30 to 50 degrees. A civil airliner in the area also reported a communications failure, although its crew saw nothing unusual. Even the landing produced one more sighting. The F-4 crew reported a cylinder-shaped object, roughly the apparent size of a T-33 trainer, with steady lights at each end and a flashing light in the middle. It passed directly over the jet. The control tower had no known traffic in the area. Tower personnel did not initially see the object, but the report says they obtained a visual after the pilot told them where to look. By then, the intercept was over. What remained was a location south of Tehran, a cluster of malfunction reports, and an account too strange to settle from the cockpit. After daylight, the F-4 crew returned by helicopter to the area where the descending light was believed to have reached the ground, a dry lake bed. They found nothing visible at the suspected spot. No craft, no crater, no wreckage, no documented landing marks. As the helicopter circled west, however, the crew detected a noticeable beeping signal. They followed it to where it was strongest and found a small house with a garden. The occupants said they had heard a loud noise and seen a very bright, lightning-like light during the night. The military message stated that the aircraft and the area would be checked for possible radiation and promised more information when available. No follow-up results appear in that message. That absence has been filled by decades of storytelling. In some versions, investigators discover radiation at the landing site. In others, they detect a mysterious electromagnetic beacon buried in the ground. The primary document supports neither claim. It records a beeping signal near a house, planned checks, and no published conclusion. A skeptical reconstruction later proposed that the signal came from an emergency locator beacon associated with an aircraft in the region. That possibility does not solve the airborne encounter, but it warns us not to turn an unidentified beep into physical proof of a landed craft. The same discipline must be applied to the document itself. The report was prepared by the U.S. Defense Attaché in Tehran and forwarded through military channels. Its distribution reached senior offices, including the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Secretary of State, the CIA, the NSA, and the White House. That routing shows the event was considered worth reporting in a strategically sensitive region. It does not mean each recipient independently investigated the case, verified every claim, or endorsed an extraterrestrial explanation. A later Defense Intelligence Agency evaluation described the report as an outstanding radar visual case and called it a classic example meeting criteria for legitimate study. The evaluator pointed to multiple observers, the credibility of Air Force personnel, visual and radar information, and reported electromagnetic effects. That assessment gives the case unusual official weight. But legitimate study is not the same as confirmed alien vehicle. The distinction is the line between an intelligence file and mythology. So what can conventional explanations account for? One skeptical theory begins with Jupiter, which was bright in the eastern sky that night. A brilliant planet can appear to move when viewed from a maneuvering aircraft, especially without a reliable reference to distance. Meteors could account for some of the smaller descending lights. Equipment faults could explain at least part of the avionics trouble. Critics have also argued that one of the F-4's had a history of electrical problems, and that radar settings may have produced a misleading impression of target size or motion. Those objections deserve space in the case, because coincidence is not impossible. The first crew could have pursued a bright planet and suffered an unrelated fault. The second crew could have interpreted separate lights as parts of one object. A radio dead zone could have overlapped the route. Under pressure, human perception can assemble disconnected events into a single threat. But the skeptical model carries its own burden. It must explain why 2 military crews reported interference during attempts to approach the phenomenon, why the second crew reported both visual contact and a radar lock, why the weapons panel and communications failed during an attempted missile engagement and returned after evasive action, why a civil aircraft also reported a communication failure in the area, and why another luminous object was reported by both the fighter crew and, after direction from the pilot, personnel in the tower. None of those details is perfect evidence. Radar returns can be misread. Memories harden. Official messages can faithfully preserve inaccurate reports. Later testimony can absorb details from years of retelling. The surviving file contains no radar tape, no recovered material, no recorded telemetry from the failing systems, and no laboratory result identifying an unknown source. It is a narrative assembled from military reporting, not a complete forensic archive. That limitation is also why the Tehran incident refuses to die. Weak UFO stories usually collapse when one witness is removed. Tehran does not depend on one witness. Remove the callers, and 2 fighter crews remain. Remove the first crew, and Jafari's radar contact, visual pursuit, and weapons failure remain. Remove the suspected landing, and the airborne sequence is still unresolved. Remove every extraterrestrial claim, and a national Air Force still launched 2 interceptors at something it could not identify. The most unsettling possibility is not necessarily that an alien intelligence visited Tehran. It is that a defense system built to reduce uncertainty instead produced layers of it. Radar supplied a target without an identity. Weapons supplied an option without power. Communications failed when the crew needed outside confirmation. Every machine intended to tell the pilots what was real became part of the mystery. If the timing was coincidental, Tehran is a case study in how equipment failures and human perception can converge into a terrifying but false picture. If the timing was not coincidental, then the encounter suggests something understood the difference between observation and attack, and responded without destroying the aircraft. There is no clean ending in the declassified pages. The message ends with tests still pending and more information promised. The later Air Force account says no additional explanation was forthcoming. Nearly half a century later, the central question remains narrower than the legend and harder than the slogan. What generated the light, the radar return, and the reported interference on the same night? Tell us where you draw the line. Was Tehran a chain of astronomical misidentifications and aircraft faults? Or does the synchronized failure of the second F-4 point to deliberate interference? Put your case in the comments and include the single piece of evidence you think matters most. Subscribe to the Shadow Ledger and continue with our next investigation into Rendlesham Forest, where another military encounter left witnesses, measurements, and a record that still divides investigators. Until then, Tehran remains open. Not proof of visitors, not safely explained, and not erased. The ledger does not close simply because the answer never arrived.